Hi and welcome back to another video. In my last post I added the illuminating X particles material from another scene to the turbulence scene, where I basically create the ring from the torus here. The torus is the emitter, and then all the particles are being emitted from there. So as you can see now, I've got a mixture of black particles and coloured particles. Obviously the black ones being motionless, and the orange ones having some speed. Um, Overall, they are all being affected by the XB turbulence, so they are all moving about. However, from my last animation, where I actually rendered out a quick video of this, I noticed that there were a lot of black particles, and they took a long time to disappear. So from that, I determined that the death rate of the particles was too high. So basically, I'm going to be adjusting the death rate of the particles, and that's done in the emitter, in the emission settings. I think the death rate is set at 30 frames, so 30 frames have to pass for the particle to be emitted, to be like gotten rid of, basically. Which is way too long, because the actual speed at which the particle comes out, the speed at which the particle is emitted, is very short. Sorry, the speed the particle is emitted at is very quick, so it's actually only coloured for a very short period of time. So more than so, the majority of the particles are pretty much black, and then all you've got is these illuminated ones for a very short period. So I'm going to have to be adjusting that. In addition as well, the animation speed at which all the particles are emitted at is way too quick. Sorry. As I'm trying to achieve like this sort of yin and yang kind of element, with the Q being geometric, which should be in the center, I want these particles here to be as natural as possible. And as it's in a space or 0G environment, the way that I think these should be reacting is very smoothly and slowly, and with no real high intensity energy. So these, if I just play quickly, take this back to the front, you can't see the particles as they're being rendered, but you can see that they're being rendered very, very quickly. And if I go quickly to my blog, so this is the last post, and this is the actual, you see that they're being rendered out very quickly. So it's very poor quality, but you see they're being rendered, or they're being emitted, sorry, very, very quickly, and it's not exactly what I want. So I'm going to have to change that, and that again is also going to be done in the emission setting. So same for the speed at which they're being emitted at will be changed through the particle speed, and I will also have to adjust this modifier here, the speed change, as well, because that has an effect. It basically acts like a gravity. There's like a gravity modifier to the ring. So if I bump this all the way down, it will kind of clamp and limit how far, and it will kind of limit how far the particles can explode out from. So here I've got quite a nice variation of depth, and that's half to do with this, half to do with the particle speed change, and half to do with the speed variant. So the speed is being emitted at 28 centimeters, but then there's also a variation of 25. So the max distance that it can go should be around 62 as the maximum, and then the minimum should be 0. So basically, you've got a gradient of particles that can be basically emitted between any of that distance. Additionally, as well, you've got the radius, but that is fairly irrelevant. And also looking at the death rate, so the lifespan there, this will be fairly easy to change. Just limit that right down, as you can look at this as and also the amount of particles which are being emitted. This is quite important with the shot time too. So if shot time is 5 frames, but then there's also 600 particles being emitted in those 5 frames. So yeah, so that's going to be the main things. So once I've adjusted these settings, I will crack on with it. So after a little bit of time adjusting some of the settings, I've finally been able to produce something close to what I want. So here is the final thing. Oh well, it's the final thing after making the adjustments. What I had to do. What I solved is the particle speed at which they're being emitted. I've slowed that right down. So I think the speed before was at about 28, and the variation was at 28. So my thinking was that um, my thinking was that the particle speed was actually measured in a distance. So um, basically from the emitter, I assumed that the speed at which the particle was emitted at was basically a set distance, and once it had achieved that set distance, then it would go no further. And that's kind of what is done. So I basically turned that down to 2 to try and have them have a really slow emission speed. But also what I'd done before was I changed the lifespan down to 10 frames, because I wanted to get rid of all of the black non-illuminated particles. And by doing that, I basically restricted how far the particles could go before they were basically before they'd been gotten rid of. So what I had was, if I turn this right down again to 10, see how spread the particles are here. That is basically what was being produced, and although the overall effect is kind of what I want, it wasn't enough, and I was basically going back and forth changing the speed, going back to the X particle speed in the modifier and changing that to constantly get something different. And this is what was being produced. Not that it was bad, but it just wasn't spread out enough for what I wanted. So luckily, after playing around with it, I was able to get something like this, and it stays at this kind of width all the time, which is nice. So if it will render, okay, it's not going to render. So yeah, basically I was changing the speed here, the lifespan, and also the XP speed. So the particle speed is at 5 now. So I think before it was at negative 150. And this was the force or the setting that I was changing to limit how far particles would go. So if I set this again, so this is at 5 now. If I set this to negative 100, you see it has the same effect where it basically just does that. But then it was really weird, because then there was some particles here that were floating and drifting away. Yeah, so that kind of addressed that. But now I've kind of got this. So this other particle things here, these are changing at about 5. The lifespan is a little bit shorter. I'll probably increase that up to 30 frames, or I'll make that a little bit less, actually, have some variation. Change that up to 28. So yeah, so after completing all of that, that's kind of resolved the particle speed issue I was having. So I'm hoping once I render the image, once I render the animation out, probably for 150 frames, that it should be emitted a lot slower, which is what I want. But subsequently, because now I've changed the speed, there are no longer any black particles anymore. Obviously, there are a couple. I've spotted one here, a couple there. They're all dotted about. However, because I've changed the speed, all of the speed in here now is very much changed. So I'm going to have to adjust this. I'm not sure which way. Basically, I'm going to have to change the gradient to a point again now where the particles, once they go below a certain velocity, basically turn off their colour, turn off. and that will either be through the gradient or through the max speed. So I'm going to, first of all, just be safe, I'm going to do what I did before. I'm going to make the gradient very far out. Go to about frame 70. Let me just change my render settings quickly. Turn them off. This will make things a bit quicker. Excuse me, sorry. Okay, so there we go. So now this starts to turn off again. So basically by changing the gradient, it has made a vast change to the actual particle color itself. So let's try that. Okay, a little bit better. I changed the max speed down to 5 because that's the maximum speed that everything's traveling at. Actually, wait, I'll turn that to 10 actually because of the variation. Leave that at it, that as is. Refresh it. Let it play for a bit. Frame 70, render. Okay. Okay, so there are some more particles which are turning off. They're more or less in the center, which is fine. I just need to keep fine tuning it. I'll probably bring this down to about half again. Reset it and play again. This is pretty much the whole process that I'm going to have to be going through. Frame 70, render. Okay, so less now. Right, okay. Touch the way down. Let's try that. My only issue here is that because I've altered some of the settings, none of the particles are actually slowing down. They're all sort of staying at a similar speed the whole way through, apart from particles in the middle. So I might have to. There's a couple ways I could either, just thinking now, there's a couple ways I could either get around this. I could sit here and play with the settings for a while and adjust some other settings to achieve the same spread of the particles which I want, in the same variety of size, and then also getting some of the particles to turn off, because there are some particles which actually are turning off. So got one there, got a large one there, and then a couple ones just here which are turning off. Or, like I've done to create a bigger variety, I've added another emitter. I could do the same, but also have some more with a different gradient color. So these larger ones, I could keep them the same, change the current one to a darker swatch, and then have another one which is basically white through to grey, or white through to black. It's that way that it's having some variation in here, because this is very bright, and then compared to the yellow, it's going to be very contrasting, very clashy as well. So I'll keep playing around with this, but I will get back to you once I've solved it and formed the final thing, so stay tuned. So after a little bit of time playing about with the settings in the animation, I finally stumbled upon how to get the colour to turn off within the material. So I was stuck on what was going on. I didn't fully understand why the material wasn't turning off. So my first thought was that it was something to do with the material or the emitter speed. And so as the speed has been significantly decreased, it was at 28, now it's at 2 centimeters. I initially thought that it was the speed which had caused an effect on the modifier here. So the max speed is set to 80, and then the gradient, I pulled the white in, white slider in. And initially I thought that the higher the speed, the more it'd be illuminated, which is true for the cone explosion. However, as this is completely different, that wasn't working. So I imported that one in and tried it on there, and that had the same effect where none of the particles were turning off the colour. So now I made another one called Current, which is the one currently on there. And as you can see, I changed the speed to max, the max speed to 10, because in the emitter, the max speed it can possibly go up to is 2, and with a variation of 2 as well. So max it can be is 4 or 0. And then in addition to this, I've also got it at 12 here, inside the X particle speed. So really I should turn that up to 12. Turn that to 12. And from the gradient, you can see that I've actually flipped them around. So I've left the white where it is and pulled the black in quite a significant amount. So if I go back to my scene, render it, you can see now I'm getting that effect where a lot of the particles are turning off. The colours are disappearing, which is good. If I go into the camera view, there we go, we can start to see it now. And it's quite nice. The balance is there. It's not too bad. And if I take this back to the first frame, play it for a little bit, let some particles render out. So see what that looks like. There we go. That's looking good. Play it some more. And there we go. They're all still the same. And it's not just one lot of particles are on and the others are off in the middle. You've got some here which are turning off. That's quite well aligned. And then yeah, so there is a good blend. I think, in all honesty, I could do with dialing this back a little bit. Sorry about that. I'll come out the camera. Take us back to the frame, frame 0, and play it for a little bit. So there we go. Getting exactly what I wanted. I could probably do with taking that back even further, maybe. Or I could do, possibly actually, instead of having that black, maybe bring that up a bit, maybe bring it to grey, and then bring that back some more. Just so that the balance is just right. Now, you can see as well, I think from the last post, I'm not sure if I enabled the turbulence. However, it had to be altered quite a bit. So the strength was greatly affecting this, and I had to bring it right down, as well as the scale. Because I've got wavy turbulence on, it was basically creating like a spiral effect. So you'd have high and then low, high and low depths, and then it would just be repeated all the way around. And that was due to the scale, because it was at 100%. So I scaled that way up, so got rid of that and brought the strength down. And now you can see that the particles are being moved about. There is a bit of turbulence going about, which is nice. And yeah, and also this is giving a nice effect now as well. But yeah, the turbulence does help to make it a bit different. If anything, I think I could do with maybe turning the speed down a little bit. The XP speed in the modifier. Take that back to the beginning. Just let the particles spread out a bit more. So go to frame 90. Render the screen. It still doesn't quite have that spread I would possibly like, but let's create a camera, keep this view here, and then let's zoom in a bit. Oh, I don't know what's going on. Let's turn this off. So this is the sphere. Let's get a bit of a flatter view. Let's render that, see what that looks like. So yeah, without depth of field enabled, which is something I had something I had talked about. Maybe I can try adding it to this camera. Basic. So I've never really played with depth of field a lot, but this is something that I thought would. Okay, let's try that. Okay, no, it's not really done anything much. Let's bring this right down. So I think one thing that might be a bit of an issue with this camera is that if I look, if we go to object, so this is quite close. This is at 30. So if I go to detail, end, so start is depth of field map rear blur. So okay, so I want the blur, the back of it to be blurred, so I'll leave that at start and then I'll push that to 50. So I'm hoping that that will start from 0 centimeters and blur through to 50, I guess. Well, that's what I think anyway. Okay, and again, that's not really done anything. Blend, high render, multipass. Okay, that's something that I'm going to have to look into. But I've managed to get the colour to turn on and off. Again, like before, it would just be a matter of fine-tuning that to make it look attractive. As well, I've been thinking a lot about the colours. I've been thinking a lot about the colours, and I think I should be able to colour this quite well with curves in After Effects. So the very next step now is, now that this is sorted, I will do a test render on the particles, see how they're being emitted, if they're too fast still, and then once that's done, I can then merge the cube and this ring together to form the final thing. So thank you very much, and stay tuned for the next